Well, hi there. I'm here today with a black-throat monitor, which is a lizard you guys have been requesting for a long time, and for very good reason, because these guys are amazing. This particular black-throat monitor, his name is Oscar, and he comes to us from Utah's Reptile Adventures. And they're actually a really cool company. They're trying to build a zoo here in Utah. And we'll include a video down in the description that talks a little bit about what they're trying to do. Black-throat monitors look a heck of a lot like giant savanna monitors. Yeah, this one is bigger than Jabba, who was the savanna monitor that we had here on this very table. And Jabba is actually a very good sized savanna monitor. This is a juvenile black-throat monitor. He weighs probably about 16 pounds right now, and they get to be regularly up around 50 pounds, sometimes as much as 60 pounds. So this is actually a fairly small black-throat monitor, which is just incredible. They are called black-throat monitors, shockingly, because they have a black throat, which is apt. They've got that rad, giant African monitor head. Really, just the African monitors have a head shape like this. The Australian and Asian monitors have got much narrower, much less chunky heads. And I mean, it is such a dinosaur dragon head. And then, you know, this is probably the burliest of them all. Because, I mean, it takes basically that head shape of the savanna monitor and just adds extra clumpiness. They are very impressive heads, and then when you put that on a 50-pound lizard, my goodness, there aren't too many things alive that look more like dinosaurs than this. The savanna monitor is actually tied for the lowest score we've ever given with another African monitor, being the Nile monitor. Given that this is basically a hybrid of two terrible pet African monitors, it will probably come as no surprise to you that the black-throat monitor is possibly the best truly giant lizard you can possibly get. Maybe you didn't see that coming. Or the fact that the black-throat monitor gets a considerably higher score than either of its African cousins. We give the black-throat monitor an overall score of 2.6 out of 5, which is still actually a pretty bad score, because for most people, giant lizards generally are really not a good choice when it comes to a pet. But if a giant pet lizard is for you, hard to do much better than this one. To explain that score and why this actually is a reasonable, unreasonable pet lizard, we are going to break it down into our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give the black-throat monitor a score of 3 out of 5. A socialized black-throat monitor, like Oscar here, it has one of the best personalities of any monitor lizard. That isn't to say that you should walk up to one in the wild. They'll tear you to shreds. And even though I'm telling you that they have a fantastic personality for a monitor lizard, this is still a giant monitor lizard. At even this size, just a juvenile size, but especially at an adult size, that tail, if it whips you, that's really gonna hurt. These enormous monster digging and climbing claws that they've got can just cut you wide open, even if they're just climbing on you, if they're not even trying to hurt you with them. And a bite can definitely send you to the emergency room. So being really nice, while that is absolutely essential for a giant pet lizard, the fact remains that they are a giant lizard and they can hurt you very badly if things go awry. As I mentioned before, they get to be around 50 pounds, and they are honestly similar to handle to, say, a 50-pound dog. I mean, you know, you can pick them up, you can carry them around, but that's probably not the best way to interact with them. Most of the time, you're going to want to interact with them on the ground. You actually can even put them in a harness, like you would put on a dog, or like I had on my tegu Gus Gus in our video on the Argentine tegu. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. You can see my daughter walking our tegu. I would not recommend letting a 2-year-old walk a black-throat monitor, though they're actually fairly easy to walk around on a harness once they get used to that harness. So just like what you see with the tegu there, that is totally possible with a black-throat monitor. It's just, it would probably drag a 2-year-old because this is a much bigger lizard. One thing that I really want to emphasize before you even consider handling or interacting with a black-throat monitor is to become very familiar with monitor behavior. Monitors are actually very good at communicating their emotions and their intentions. They puff up and arch their back, and they'll kind of get ready to whip with their tail, and just the way that they look at you. Once you're familiar with monitors, they're very easy to read, and that is a really important ability to have if you're going to interact with a 50-pound monitor. As a result, I would not personally recommend a black-throat monitor as your first pet monitor. I would recommend something like an Ackie, which is just a phenomenal pet monitor that will show you all of those monitor behaviors. And yet, if you misread an Ackie, the consequences are so much more minor than they would be with a black-throat monitor. A misread with one of these could be absolutely catastrophic. When it comes to care, we give the black-throat monitor a score of 3 out of 5. In a lot of ways, they're very similar to take care of to a savanna monitor, with the exception of the fact that the black-throat monitor is a much bigger lizard. Usually, when I say that a lizard is bigger, that means that everything gets harder. But with the black-throat monitor versus a savanna monitor, the opposite is true. Savanna monitors, one of the worst things about them is getting their diet right. They're going to be an animal that feeds primarily on invertebrates like insects, and buying enough insect feeders to feed a savanna monitor properly is really expensive. Black-throat monitors, being a larger monitor, are feeding heavily on vertebrate prey in the wild, which means in addition to insect feeders and eggs, which both of them will enjoy, these guys eat a lot of whole vertebrates in the wild, which means that feeding them a diet that is heavy on whole vertebrates like mice and rats and quail and chickens and just, you know, things like the San Diego Zoo diet. If you're feeding those things to a black-throat monitor, they're not going to die of fatty liver disease in the same way that their cousin, the savanna monitor, will. And that makes them much easier to care for, which is awesome. They still require huge amounts of space and high basking temperatures, but, you know, honestly, probably not more space than you should be giving to a savanna monitor. The difference is just the fact that this monitor is so huge that it's obvious it needs a ton of space. Savanna monitors need just as much space, but you can get away with keeping them in a small enclosure for a few years until it becomes obese and dies. They're going to need access to water all the time, clean water in a large bowl that's hard to flip over, but they don't need their own giant pond like you would need for a water monitor or a Nile monitor, and that makes things a lot easier. They do need deep substrate and in an enormous enclosure, like just so much substrate. And that substrate has to be of such a nature that it will hold a burrow and not cave in on them, because these guys are going to dig, and they're going to dig a lot. That's what these claws are all about. They climb with those a little bit, but mostly they dig with those claws. And they'll also use them to cut your arms open. You can always tell somebody who's got big monitors because they look like they've got other serious problems. Even though these guys are going to eat vertebrate prey in the wild, which means that you can keep them healthy on a more affordable diet than would be the case for a savanna monitor, it's still a huge active lizard. They're going to eat. They're going to eat you out of house and homes. The reality. They are going to eat so much prey. So be prepared for that. You're definitely going to want to supplement their diet with vitamins and calcium. And with a lizard this size, I mean, you're going to be going through large quantities of this. So buy the big jars like from Costco. Except there's no lizard Costco. Ultraviolet exposure is definitely a good idea. If you can get them direct sunlight, that would be the best. If not, UVB bulbs and mercury vapor bulbs and their basking lights would be great. I mean, some people argue as to whether or not that's required for the varanids, for the monitors. I would definitely recommend it. There are a lot of studies that show that it does do them a lot of good. And the fact is, an enormous enclosure, it's going to be a lot of UV. And just make sure that you keep your interactions positive and consistent. Be constantly working with these monitors, because this is not one that you want to have revert to being like a wild monitor. With consistent interaction, they tend to become just terrific. But I mean, if it was a wily beast, what a beast it would be. I would recommend target training your black-throat monitor. This is something I've done with Gus, which really helps a lot, because monitors and tegus, these sorts of lizards, tend to be very food motivated, and when you open that enclosure to get them out, you don't want to be on the receiving end of that food response. And so, you know, what I have with Gus is a little target of a specific color that he's used to, and I always hold it up next to the enclosure, and he comes up to that, he'll put his nose up against it, he'll even open his mouth at it, but he stays at the target while I mess around with this food bowl or whatever I'm doing, and then he knows he's not going to get fed until after he's been around the target and gone to the target. And so he knows the difference between being fed and me just going in there to interact with him. And that is very beneficial even with a tegu, and this, I mean, this makes a tegu not even seem like an unreasonable lizard. When it comes to hardiness, we give the black-throat monitor a score of 4 out of 5. If you get a captive bred baby, which are quite available actually with black-throat monitors, and provide it the food, water, and temperatures mostly that they require, along with exercise, they should do really well for you. Like we mentioned before, because these are a larger monitor that is adapted to a diet heavy in vertebrate prey, they're going to do much better on a vertebrate heavy diet than will their cousins, the savanna monitors. I mean, that is probably one of the main reasons that savanna monitors do not live very long in captivity. I mean, honestly, there's two problems with the savannas. One is that we don't know exactly what they need, and the second is we don't even provide what we know they need. When you buy a $30 lizard, you're just not prepared to give it a room in your house and, you know, $100 worth of insects every few weeks. You know, because this is a huge monitor and a comparatively very expensive monitor, they're just a lot more likely to get what they need than a savanna monitor, which appears like you can cut corners with it right up until the day it dies on you at about maybe 5 years. When it comes to availability, we give the black-throat monitor a score of 2 out of 5. Every now and then you'll see one of these guys at an expo. Rarely. I mean, if you live by a really cool pet shop, you might see one in a pet shop, but that's pretty rare. Where you're gonna have the best luck finding one, especially a captive bred individual, is gonna be directly from a breeder, probably online. And those are going to be the best people to contact anyway. When it comes to upfront costs, we give the black-throat monitor a score of 1 out of 5. Breeding monitors, especially ginormous monitors, is expensive and difficult. As a result, there aren't a lot of people that produce these, and there are a lot of people that want them, even if they're not all people that probably should have one. Therefore, black-throat monitors are considerably more expensive than, say, their cousins, the savanna monitors or the Nile monitors, which both make terrible pets. The enclosure that you're going to need for a black-throat monitor is absolutely immense. I mean, savanna monitors should actually be provided with a similarly sized enclosure, but we're talking potentially a whole room in your house. If you have enormous rooms where you're building a separate enclosure inside of it, that enclosure is going to be huge. It's definitely going to need to be custom made. There's nobody selling enclosures pre-built that are this size unless they intend for humans to live in them. As we mentioned before, the lights that you're going to need for these guys are going to cost you a fortune. I would definitely recommend mercury vapor bulbs and UV lighting. The difference between this and other lizards is just that you're going to need like a plethora of these bulbs. Like, it's not just like one lamp. In fact, if you're trying to give them a basking spot using only one lamp, you're going to end up heating only a small section of the lizard, and they're going to be trying to heat their entire body up to very hot, because monitors, especially these African savanna type monitors, they're going to be warming up to extremely high temperatures, and they're going to try to do that all in one part of their body, probably right around where their stomach is. And you see a lot of monitors that get a big burn on their back right in that area because they just sit in this intense light for a long time to try to heat their whole body up to that high temperature. What you're going to want to do is have a cluster of these lights all together so that they get heat distributed out over their entire body so they don't burn any one section of their body. And I mean, so this is going to take just a ton of these bulbs. Definitely if you live somewhere where you can house them outside, that's going to be easier, but there aren't very many places that you can give these guys proper temperatures year-round outdoors. So odds are you're going to be spending a fortune on UVB bulbs and mercury vapor bulbs. You're going to need a big water bowl, a big heavy water bowl, which is not cheap, but a heck of a lot cheaper than a pond. You're going to need some enormous hides. I mean, you know, while they're young, you can probably use some reptile hides. After that, you're probably going to need to take something like a watering trough from the hardware store, and you're going to cut a section out of that and flip it upside down, and that's going to be the hide. Then on top of that, you're going to need deep substrate, and so you're going to need to go to the hardware store for this because, I mean, you're going to need lots of cubic meters of substrate. I mean, just an unimaginable quantity. Like, it would probably be cheaper if you bought it by the dump truck load. And you would go through that. So there's a feather in your cap. And you know, food doesn't even factor into the upfront costs. That's just what it's going to cost you to really get it going. But food is going to cost you a fortune. You know, this is a great pet as far as the temperament and just being an impressively large lizard and stuff. But I mean, this is a rich person's pet. This is like when you're trying to decide between, you know, getting a Bentley and a Rolls Royce. You know, maybe then you're like, I think I might get a black-throat monitor too because I've got an extra room I don't know what to do with, and I have all this money. I don't know what to spend it on. Black-throat monitor. And that is why we give the black-throat monitor an overall score of 2.6. As you can tell, I mean, in a lot of ways, they're really great. But there are always some serious downsides to what is just an incredibly large lizard. For most people, a giant monitor lizard is just absolutely a horrible idea. If you want to know what a great idea is, they're called Ackies. We talked about them before. We have a whole video on them. That is all of this coolness pretty much shrunken down into a tiny little package. Totally reasonable. Awesome. Couldn't recommend them more highly to anybody who is ready for a monitor of any kind. But if you are in the market for a truly colossal monitor, this one might be the best. As always, like and subscribe. Make sure to click that bell. That's apparently more important than it's ever been before. So if you want to get any sort of notifications to let you know that we're featuring some new stinking rad reptile, because I mean, look at the things we cover these days. You're going to want to click that bell. And thank you, as always, to our patrons at Patreon. You guys are doing so much to make this channel amazing, and we're doing 2 videos a week now because of you guys. We are just so grateful for what you guys make possible, so thank you so much. We hope to see you real soon. You can always tell somebody who's got big monitors because they look like they've got other serious problems. Hey, because their throat be black. Look at it. That's a black throat. Mm-hmm. Their cousin's the white throat. It's got a little bit of a white throat.